All right, we need to talk about what some people are calling Trump's Gestapo in what's turning into really a fascist state in America. It sounds like hyperbole. It's not. So the first person we're going to hear from is Tim Waltz, who was giving a commencement speech for some law students, and he mentioned this. And then we're going to hear from other experts and some other prominent people about what's going on in the US right now with respect to authoritarianism and fascism. Let's get into it.
Right now, more than any other time in my lifetime, we need you to live up to the oath that you're about to take. Because I have to be honest with you, you are graduating into a genuine emergency. Every single day, the President of the United States finds new ways to trample rights and undermine the rule of law. Now, I get it for some of you out there. Some would say, boy, it's getting way too political for a commencement address. But I would argue I wouldn't be honoring my oath if I didn't address this head on.
Okay, so a lot of people are saying the Democrats are being weak, not speaking up, not fighting back about what's going on. So it's really good to see Tim Waltz standing up and saying this.
And I'm going to start with the flashing red light. Donald Trump's modern-day Gestapo is scooping folks up off the streets. They're in unmarked vans, wearing masks, being shipped off to foreign torture dungeons. No chance to mount a defense, not even a chance to kiss a loved one goodbye. Just grabbed up by masked agents, shoved into those vans, and disappeared. To be clear, there's no way for us to know whether they were actually criminals or not, because they refused to give them a trial. We're supposed to just take their word for it. And when duly elected members of Congress tried to exercise their constitutional right of oversight at an ICE facility, they get shoved around and threatened with arrest. And when courts told them repeatedly to knock it off, they brazenly defy them. Meanwhile, we have a aspiring fascist in Stephen Miller on TV talking about suspending habeas corpus. All of you know this.
I've made a video about that. Stephen Miller, who seems to be a fascist. He is speaking in fascist language. He wants to suspend habeas corpus. Go and see that video. If you don't know what we're talking about, it's suspending the rule of law, which is why he's saying it in this context here. And it's very dangerous. It's authoritarian. It's fascist.
That's only used in times of rebellion or emergency, neither of which is happening right now. By the way, they're not only kicking out folks who are undocumented here, they're kicking out citizens. A few weeks ago, they kicked out 3 children, all under 8 years old. One of them had brain cancer, for Christ's sakes. It's not hyperbole to say we're not far from a world where anyone could get that knock at a door. And there's no guarantee you'd get your day in court, or that you'd ever make it home alive from whatever corner of the world they stick you in. And then you have a vice president. When not getting chastised by various popes, he's offering up horrific arguments. Horrific arguments. It is his view that due process is optional. I don't know what the hell they teach at Yale, but the Constitution is pretty clear.
So he's talking about Yale because that's where J.D. Vance went. He seems to be very dangerous because it's not that he's uneducated. Trump just seems to listen to people who are in his ear, like Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance. But J.D. Vance went to Yale. He should know. So he's educated and yet has fascist tendencies.
It doesn't say only if it's convenient. It's crystal clear. Here's the thing. Due process isn't just lawyer speak. It's a right that stretches back centuries. It was wrested away from kings that heroes fought and died for. And we're just going to surrender it? Surrender it to Donald Trump, a guy whose only knowledge of the law is by being a criminal defendant himself.
Okay, so this is Al Gore, of course. He's got something to say about this as well, the Trump regime in particular.
I understand very well why it is wrong to compare Adolf Hitler's Third Reich to any other movement. It was uniquely evil, full stop. I get it. But there are important lessons from the history of that emergent evil. We've already seen, by the way, how populist authoritarian leaders have used migrants as scapegoats and have fanned the fires of xenophobia to fuel their own rise to power. And power seeking is what this is all about. Our Constitution, written by our founders, is intended to protect us against a threat identical to Donald Trump, someone who seeks power at all costs to get more power.
So my previous video was about similarities and differences between the 1930s Germany, when we all know what happened there. And the point is there's steps along the way. And the first step is what's going on here. It doesn't mean that it's going to end the same way that did, but we know from history, we recognize what's going on. These first steps, suspending the due process of the law, is one important step that is a red flag, a red light.
Federal appeals court on Wednesday ordered the Trump administration to transfer the abducted Tufts Fulbright scholar, international student Rumeysa Ozturk from Louisiana back to Vermont, where her case could be heard. You just interviewed the Massachusetts Congresswoman Breonna Presley about her treatment.
Yes, so this was the student who was abducted by ICE, Trump's Gestapo, off the streets. They had plain clothes on, they had masks, they took her into a van, so without due process, into prison. The courts actually stood up well here, and she has been released, but this is another red flag.
Horrific treatment. We're not just detaining foreign students in this country for speech crimes, Amy. We're torturing them too. If you listen to what happened to Badr Khansuri, who's a Georgetown student who was also detained, the torture that he's gone through, the abuse, the sleeping on the floor, the denial of clean underwear, and now Rumeysa Ozturk. Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman, told me that when she went to see her, she was denied health care. She suffered severe asthma attacks. She had her hijab removed without consent. I mean, Louisiana, that detention center in Louisiana is famous for human rights crimes. So why are people being sent from Vermont and Massachusetts and New York, Mahmoud Khalil, to Louisiana? That in itself is a question we should ask ourselves. We're torturing people again.
And a judge just stopped immigrants from being sent to Libya on a U.S. military jet. And over 80 students were just arrested at Columbia.
So they're sending people to El Salvador, to the Gulag there, CCOT, without due process, and they're looking at ways of sending people other places and taking people off the streets, even US citizens, arresting them without due process. Now, some people, especially MAGA people, might be thinking, well, it's not me and I voted for this. But the point these people are making is that if it can happen to these people, one day it could happen to you, it could happen to anybody.
Rubio said he'd pull international visas of students who are protesting.
Fascism isn't coming, Amy, it's here. We are in that historical period. Now, this is not just about Trump. You look at the global rise of fascism and authoritarianism. You look at what's happening with Narendra Modi in India and Orban in Hungary, Putin in Russia and Ukraine, Middle East autocrats. We are in that place where a democracy, the progress we made over the last 80 years, 100 years, is at stake, very much so.
Democracy breaking down in more than one country. You may not be aware, but this is definitely the rise of authoritarianism around the world. Now, this is from a New York Times piece. They did a piece on this, talking to experts on authoritarianism. I've taken some snippets from it.
The Trump administration deporting hundreds of men without a trial.
I've spent a lot of time in the last decade trying to prepare people if Trump were elected once, let alone twice. We want to make sure that if there is a political crisis in the U.S., that Americans are organized.
We've just gotten started. You haven't even seen anything yet. It's all just kicking in.
I'm a historian of totalitarianism. Friends, they were walking around and saying, we have checks and balances, so let's inhale, checks and balances, exhale, checks and balances. And I thought, my God, we're like people on the Titanic, saying our ship can't sink. We've got the best ship, we've got the strongest ship, we've got the biggest ship, our ship can't sink. And what you know as a historian is that there is no such thing as a ship that can't sink.
I look at fascist rhetoric. America has long had an exceptionalist narrative. Fascism can happen elsewhere, but not here.
But talking about American exceptionalism is basically a way to get people to fall into line. If you think that there's this thing out there called America, and it's exceptional, that means that you don't have to do anything. Whatever is happening, it must be freedom. And so then what your definition of freedom is just gets narrowed and narrowed and narrowed and narrowed, and soon you're using the word freedom, but what you're talking about is authoritarianism.
Okay, so the point they're making here really is that it can happen anywhere. People really don't think that it can happen in the US because of the long, proud history of democracy. It has been sliding. People have said in the comments, people from MAGA, people who support Trump, look at what previous administrations did, the Biden administration, Obama. And yes, it hasn't been fast. It has been a slide. There are things under those administrations that you could call authoritarian or semi-authoritarian or on that way there, at least illiberal democracy, but now we're seeing a fast slide. And so if people who voted for Trump, who support Trump, don't see that it's actually what is happening now, then they need to wake up, I think. And how long is it going to take before people realize what's going on here?
Toni Morrison warned us.
The descent into a final solution is not a jump. It's one step, and then another, and then another.
It's a good point that is made there. I was just reading about this today. The final solution they were talking about there in Germany from the 1930s to the 1940s. If you read about that, if the steps that were taken, it was seemingly slow. Actually, compared to what's happening in the US now, it was slow, but it started with one small thing and another small thing, a change of a law, a change of a policy, and then escalating over time. The final solution was that final step, but there was a lot along the way, and this becomes a point where it becomes hard to fight back. And some of these things, suspending due process of the law, is along the way. Not saying it will end like that, but definitely warning signs.
We are seeing those steps accelerated right now.
This not knowing who is next creates a state of paralysis in society.
The Tufts student whose visa was removed because she co-authored an article in the Tufts student newspaper.
So this is Trump's Gestapo on the streets. Look at plain clothes, mask, basically an abduction if there's no due process, if it's not a proper arrest for a reason, and they don't have the chance to be put in front of a judge to say whether they're guilty of anything or not, whether they've committed any crime. It's basically a kidnapping, isn't it? And it's very public.
I thought, what would I do if guys in masks tried to grab my student? Would I scream? Would I run away? Would I try to pull the mask off? Would I try to videotape the scene? Would I try to pull the guys off of her? Maybe I would get scared and run away. The truth is, I don't know. Not knowing terrified me.
It's a deliberate act of terror. It's not necessary. It's just being done to create a spirit of us and them.
What starts to matter is not what is concealed, but what has been normalized. There's no limit to the depravity and the sadism.
The White House released this video titled ASMR, Illegal Alien Deportation Flight.
And the cruelty that we are watching now play out in real time.
This facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use.
You have to continually ask yourself the question, is this okay?
People say, oh, the Democrats should be doing more, they should be fixing things. But if you want the Democrats to do things, you have to create the platform for them. You have to create the spectacle, the pageantry, the positive energy, the physical place where they can come to you.
Poland recently went through a shift towards authoritarianism. Unlike in Russia, unlike in Hungary, the media remained a place in Poland where you could criticize the regime. And as a result, democracy returned. The moral of Poland is that our democratic institutions, the media, the university, and the courts are essential. You know you're living in a fascist society when you're constantly going over in your head the reasons why you're safe. What we want is a country where none of us have to feel that way.
So, really important points there. Of course, the courts, the media, and universities, all very important, and all things that the Trump administration is attacking. If you notice that, if you're aware of the steps that are taken, as I said, incremental steps, that's what's going on right now. So seeing this reminds me of something that people say about 1930s Germany. People often wonder, what would you have done? What would you be doing? What would you have done about it back in the 1930s if you'd seen it happening around you? Well, think about what you might have been doing then, you are doing right now. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. Do you think that ICE is, in fact, Trump's Gestapo? Is it heading that way? Some people have mentioned brown shirts. They're recruiting more people to do this job. Let me know in the comments what you think of all this. And right now, I'm going to put a related video right there and also a subscribe link on screen. It's a new channel here. It's going well so far. So please subscribe if you want to get more of these kinds of videos from me in the very near future. And thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.